Hi there. In this session, we're going to be having a look at writing files in Java. This is a very similar process to that you would have used for reading data from a file. It's also similar to the process that you would have used when we were trying to display data. So let's start with a simple line. Nothing very inventive. And I'm going to display that data. So system out print line. System out is a type of stream. We are writing to one of the output streams, in this case connected to the system console. So there's my output. I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing when I'm trying to write to a file. It's just instead of writing to the console stream, I'm going to be writing to a file stream connected to a file. So just as we would have done with file input, I'm going to be creating a file object, file equals new file, and there we are. And let's call this data.txt. It's going to hold data, some random stuff. We're working with the file object. I haven't yet imported it, so let's add the import. And in the same way that we had to connect the file object to a scanner to manage input, I'm going to connect my file object to a FileWriter object to write the file. There are two ways of writing to a file that we'll cover. FileWriter is one of them, and PrintWriter is the other one. We'll look at that shortly. This one is the FileWriter, and I'm going to connect it to the file by adding that as the parameter for the constructor. The FileWriter doesn't exist yet. Let's add the import for FileWriter. Alt Enter. I left out new. There we go. We're creating a new FileWriter object. We're being prompted to manage an exception. When we used the scanner object, we had to manage the potential problem of the file not existing. That would give us a file not found exception. When we're writing to a file, we don't have that particular consideration because the file will be created if it doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean there couldn't be other problems. And these will be IO exceptions. Potential problems would be if, for example, the file system we're writing to is read-only and nothing can be saved. Or if the file is open in another application and we're now trying to write to a file that is locked by the operating system. Both of these will generate an IO exception. All right, let's have a look at what we can do. So Alt Enter, and you'll see we can add an exception to the message signature. We can add throws IO exception, but that doesn't handle the error. It just reports it. We want to manage it in a user-friendly way. So we're going to try and catch again. And instead of throwing a runtime exception, which doesn't do much other than report on the error again, we're going to display a slightly more friendly message. So the file could not be written. Now, without creating a file and opening it and causing the error, this isn't going to generate an error at the moment because there aren't any problems with this. We're just going to have, you'll notice on the left here, suddenly data.txt has appeared. I've created that file. There's nothing in it at the moment because I didn't write any lines to it. So let's add something that will write a line. You will also notice that we have a hint, which we're going to talk about shortly. Right, let's write a line. FileWriter provides the write method. So FileWriter, that's the name of the instance of the class, name of my object, dot write, and I'm going to write that line, which we created a moment ago, to the file. My line is defined after this declaration, so let's just move that to the beginning of the code. All right, and let's see what happens. All right, this is run, and nothing happened. The reason nothing happened is one of the problems when we're working with file streams. We have to flush the data from the write buffer to the file. So there's one more instruction I'm going to have to include, FileWriter.flush. Run it again, and here we are. This is a line. Very imaginative, but it actually worked. Having to flush files the whole time is an irritation. There is a way around it. Somewhere around Java 7, the exception handler, try and catch, was extended slightly. And what they did was add the option to add a set of resources. I've created some brackets, and you'll see it's prompting me to add something. I'm going to take this line as a whole, nothing changed in the line, where I create an instance of my FileWriter, because this is the resource I'm testing. Was I actually able to open the file for writing? And I'm going to move that into the try with resources block, just like that. Right, let's modify that slightly. This is also a line, just to see if there's anything different. And let's change that to done as well while we're at it, just so that it looks a bit more useful. All right, let's see what happens now. All I've done is I've deleted that flush option. I'm no longer flushing the file. And I've moved the line where I initialize my file and instantiate the object into the try with resources block. Try with resources does two things. It flushes the write buffer, which is what flush was doing, and it makes sure that all resources are released as soon as the try block finishes. So let's see. This is also a line. So this worked, and I didn't have to use flush. Try with resources is a very handy way of managing this. All right. What if I want to add a second line? With a bit of luck, we'll have two lines, except in that they concatenate together. This is because one of the problems with FileWriter is it doesn't send line ends. I'm going to have to do that explicitly. I'm going to have to add a line end character to make sure that I get two lines. Now I have two lines. Using an explicit line end character like this can be awkward. If you're working in some versions of Windows, you're going to have to use a two-character combination like that. /r for carriage return and /n to create a new line. If you're working on Unix-based computers, Apple counts as that these days, Linux, and a number of other Unixes, then you'd just use the new line character. If you're using an older Apple, you'd just use the carriage return. So to manage this, Java has this property of the system class, system.line_separator. And that will add the correct line end separator character for whatever system you happen to be running on. Remember, you're running inside the Java runtime environment, and that will be built for whatever system you're using. So that's where this will be identified. Now, if I run this, I'm going to have two distinct lines. That's still awkward. Luckily, there is a way around this. And the way around is to use a PrintWriter. PrintWriter adds a few features to FileWriter. I'm going to change these to PrintWriters. I'm going to have to add the class to the imports. I'm going to rename this as PrintWriter, just for consistency. We're working with PrintWriter now. And you'll notice it's not giving me any errors. I haven't changed anything except in my FileWriters have become PrintWriters, and this will run exactly the same way as the FileWriter did. Absolutely no changes, same result. But PrintWriter does give me a couple of other options, and this is one of them. In addition to just the write function, I now also have printLine. You know printLine already. PrintLine was a method in the system to print a line and add a line break when you're writing to the console. So this allows you to use exactly the same mnemonic. That's very friendly. There we go. Print two lines. This is a print line. Let's just see. So now we have two print lines. You can also use a print formatter in the same way as you have printf with system out, I can now create a format string. Let's make this, going to add a string, and let's add a number. There we go. So we line and just some random number. The one problem we've got with printf is printf doesn't include a case return. This is consistent with printf for system out. You're going to have to put in a case return if you're going to be using the printf, or follow it with a call to print line. Let's see what we get. And there we are. This is a print line 10. So my values got formatted and output to the line. We're still using the try with resources. I thought I'd just point that out. Okay, all very friendly. What happens if we want to add data to already an existing file? If I change this and I run it, the original file gets overwritten and the data gets replaced. This is another line. What happened to my original data? Well, it's gone. If I want to append data, and this is a function that happens very often, if you are keeping log files, this is an ongoing record of processes and you want to be able to refer back. Or if you are getting data from some Internet of Things device, you store the data with a time and you can refer back to that in history. There's no sense in recreating a file every time. You just want to append that data to the existing file. You want to be able to say, this is a line, let me add another line, another line, another line, and just let the file grow. So how would we do that here? Well, this is one place where the PrintWriter doesn't do as well as a FileWriter. A FileWriter has a very simple way of doing this. So I'm going to go back to the FileWriter for a moment. We're sticking with try with resources. There we go, FileWriter, and I'm going to change this to FileWriter. And I'm going to rename these just to be consistent. There we go, FileWriter. That should just be FileWriter, not FileWriter. And you'll notice immediately it's complaining about the printf because FileWriter doesn't have printf and it doesn't have printline. It only has write. FileWriter writes a character stream. It can be any characters, but it's just a single character stream. So let's take the text out. We're just writing that single line. I will add the line separator. There we go, line separator. Just so those can go onto a different line. New line. Right. This is the original FileWriter exercise, more or less. What am I going to do to make it append? This is a modification of the constructor. So I'm going to the constructor of the FileWriter and I'm adding an extra parameter with the value true. And you'll notice a prompt there immediately saying append is true. So what will this do? Voila. We are adding this to the existing file, and you notice it didn't prepend a new line character. My previous line ended with no new line, the data, and my new line added underneath. So this is how we append. I said that FileWriter does something that PrintWriter can't, and a PrintWriter can't do this straight off the bat. If I were to replace this with the PrintWriter again, PrintWriter, you'll notice that it's giving me an error. There's a problem, and the problem is it cannot resolve the constructor of file and boolean. PrintWriter does not have this option. How am I going to manage that? Well, this is where try with resources is going to come to my rescue again. And the idea that the PrintWriter doesn't just have a constructor that has to be built from a file. I can also use a reference to a different input stream, or I can use a reference to a FileWriter. I'm going to create a FileWriter in this try with resources. FileWriter, there we go. FileWriter. equals new FileWriter, and I'll connect that to the file. And instead of connecting my PrintWriter, which I'm going to rename PrintWriter, to the file, I'm going to connect it to my FileWriter. There we go. So let's use the PrintWriter again here. Print and make sure my spelling is correct. PrintWriter. I'm not going to use write, I'm going to use print line. We're going to ignore the line separator. I'm going to want to see whether this is going to write to a new file, whether it's going to append to the file correctly. Remember that we had to specify an addition in the constructor of the FileWriter. I had to tell it that it must open in append mode, so true. This is a PrintWriter line, and we run that. Let's see what happened. And there we are. This is a PrintWriter line has been appended onto the existing file. So using a PrintWriter connected to a FileWriter, and the FileWriter connected to a file and open in append mode, and now I have a PrintWriter that I can append to. And using a PrintWriter, I can use the method calls that I'm used to from when working the system out, the stuff we've been doing since your baby steps in Java. All right, I hope you find that useful.